So tell me about your experience.
Well, I was born in Albemarle County, February 14th, 1840, on the George's estate. My childhood up to age 10 was spent in playing around the house, minding chickens. Between age 10 and 12, to mind the sheep and cows and pasture. Old man George died, and in the division of the estate, I was given to his daughter, as was also my parents. She was married to a man by the name of Johnson. With this family, I was taken into the house and trained to be a butler. When I was 17 years old, they hired me out to be a man in Richmond, Virginia, by the name of Brooks. I served in this house as butler during 1858, 1859, and since our time always expired on Christmas Eve. On that day in 1859, the Johnsons took me back to their home in Goochland County, where I remained as their butler until the Civil War. Of course, on our plantation, we were worked hard, but we got plenty of good food, nice quarters in which to stay, and our master was not mean. He seldom ever had any of his slaves whipped. On the adjoining farm, which was owned by a man named Allen, I have seen them carry many of their slaves down to the barn, tie their hands and feet, lay them flat on their faces and whip them until the blood would run out their backs. One day in particular, I remember the overseer on the Allen farm tied 3 slaves, Daniel Myers, Edmund Clark, and Joe Prosser, up to a tree and lashed them with a big bull whip till they could hardly stand up. Then he cut the ropes loose and made them go back to work. See, sometimes it would be raining hard, storming, and the old poor white overseer would want some of the slaves to go out into the wood to get the cattle or other stock. And if the slaves refused, they would get a whipping. White folks in my part of the country didn't think anything of breaking up a family and selling the children in one section of the South and the parents in another section. If they got short of cash and wanted $400 or $500, they would say, John, Mary, James, I want you to get ready and go down to the courthouse with me this morning. They would take you down there, and that's the last we'd see of them. When they put the women on the auction block, bidders would come up and feel the women's legs, lift up their garments and examine their hips, feel their breasts, and examine them to see if they could bear children. If the women were in good condition, they would bring anywhere from $150 to $500 apiece. My master Johnson always had more slaves than he could work, but he preferred to hire them out to sell them. When a slave was hired out, the man would have to sign a contract to pay the owner $250 at the end of the year and to give the slave food, shelter, 2 suits of clothes, and the necessary medicine during the year. Whether the slave stayed with the person who hired him or not, the lessee would still have to pay the contract at the end of the year. I had 2 uncles, Edmund and John Johnson, who never worked more than 4 months during the 4 or 5 years that they were hired out. They would go with the person who hired them, work about a month, then steal off into the woods and stay until their time was out. Then they would return to the original owner in Goochland. Of course, the master never punished them for doing this. He didn't care because he always collected his contract just the same. Edmund and John always worked all right when they were at home, but they were always determined not to work for anyone else.